The night Evelyn Harper stood in front of the mirror wearing a dress that left almost nothing to the imagination, she believed she was stepping into a more exciting future. What she didn't know was that her husband had already begun paying attention to the things she thought no one noticed. Months later, when her entire world collapsed under the weight of her own choices, she would look back on that single sentence, "Don't wait up," and realize it was the most expensive mistake she had ever made. The October wind swept across Lake Michigan and rattled the tall windows of the Cole residence. From his office on the second floor, Nathan Cole looked up from a quarterly earnings report when he heard footsteps moving through the hallway. The house was unusually quiet. It had become that way over the past year. 8 years of marriage had transformed their routines into predictable rhythms. Once, silence inside the house felt comfortable. Now, it felt like an unanswered question hanging between rooms. Nathan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. At 42, he had built one of Chicago's fastest-growing cybersecurity firms from a rented office above a coffee shop into a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. People admired him. Investors trusted him. Employees respected him. Yet recently, none of those accomplishments seemed capable of fixing what was happening inside his own home. The footsteps stopped outside the office. A moment later, Evelyn appeared in the doorway. Nathan instinctively smiled. Then the smile faded. Not because she wasn't beautiful. She was. The problem was that she looked beautiful for someone else. The black dress she wore was unlike anything he had ever seen her wear before. Elegant. Expensive. Dangerous. The sheer fabric revealed far more than it concealed, turning heads before she would even enter a room. Nathan stared for a second longer than intended. Evelyn noticed. A faint smile touched her lips. "What?" she asked. Nathan stood. "You look different." She laughed softly. "Different good or different bad?" He hesitated. "Different." For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed her face. Disappointment, perhaps. Or annoyance. Nathan couldn't tell anymore. That realization bothered him more than the dress itself. There had been a time when he could identify every emotion she felt before she even spoke. Now she seemed distant, like someone slowly disappearing behind glass. Evelyn checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. "You know how these charity events are." Nathan nodded. Of course he knew. Chicago's elite loved charity galas almost as much as they loved being photographed at them. Still, something felt strange. Not wrong. Just unfamiliar. "When will you be home?" he asked. The question sounded normal enough. Yet Evelyn paused before answering. The pause lasted barely a second. Nathan noticed it anyway. She grabbed her purse. "I'm not sure. You said the event ends around 10. It might go later." Nathan nodded again. Another small answer. Another tiny distance. The accumulation of those tiny distances was beginning to feel enormous. He walked toward her. "You want me to come?" She answered too quickly. "No." The word hung in the air. Then she corrected herself. "I mean, there'll be a lot of marketing people there." "You'll be bored." Nathan forced a smile. "Right." The explanation made sense, at least on the surface. Evelyn adjusted an earring. "You should get some sleep." Nathan looked at her. She avoided his eyes. Then she said the sentence that would stay with him for months. "Don't wait up." Simple. Casual. Almost meaningless. Yet something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. Nathan couldn't explain why. He watched her walk toward the front door. The sound of her heels echoed through the marble foyer. A moment later, the door closed. Silence returned. Nathan stood alone. For reasons he couldn't fully understand, he suddenly felt cold. Not angry. Not suspicious. Just unsettled. As if something important had shifted without making a sound. Downstairs, headlights disappeared into the darkness. Nathan remained by the window. He remembered another October evening years earlier. Back when they were newly married. Back when Evelyn used to call him 3 times during business trips simply because she missed hearing his voice. Back when she laughed more. Back when she looked at him, the way she now seemed to look at everything else. He pushed the thought away. Marriage changed. People changed. Every relationship went through difficult seasons. That was what he told himself. That was what he wanted to believe. Later that night, he sat alone in the kitchen. The clock above the stove showed 11:15. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Nathan poured himself coffee he didn't need. The house felt larger than usual, emptier. His phone rested beside him. No messages. No updates. Nothing. He considered texting Evelyn. Instead, he put the phone down. He didn't want to become that husband, the insecure one, the controlling one, the suspicious one. Midnight arrived. Then 12:30. Nathan eventually returned to his office. A framed photograph sat on his desk, taken 6 years earlier during a vacation in California. Evelyn stood beside him on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, both of them laughing, both of them looking toward the future. Nathan stared at the picture. When had that version of them disappeared? And more importantly, had he somehow caused it? The front door finally opened shortly after 1 in the morning. Nathan heard it from upstairs. He remained seated. Evelyn moved quietly through the house. Almost too quietly. A few minutes later, their bedroom door closed. Nathan looked at the photograph one last time, then he turned off the office light. As he walked toward the bedroom, he noticed something he would normally never have paid attention to. A faint, unfamiliar scent lingering in the hallway. Not perfumey. Not exactly. Something masculine. Subtle enough to dismiss. Easy to ignore. And that was precisely what Nathan did. Because at that moment, he still trusted his wife. Even as the first pieces of the truth were already beginning to fall into place. The first few weeks after the charity gala passed without any dramatic discoveries. There were no lipstick stains, no anonymous messages, no obvious lies. If Nathan had been looking for the kind of betrayal people saw in movies, he would have found nothing. Instead, what he found were small inconsistencies, tiny fractures hidden inside ordinary life. And somehow, those felt worse. November settled over Chicago with gray skies and early sunsets. The city seemed permanently wrapped in cold rain and lake wind. Nathan buried himself in work during the day and tried to convince himself that everything at home was normal. Yet every evening brought another subtle change. Evelyn had always shared stories about her day. Not every detail, but enough. Now her answers became shorter, vague, more carefully constructed. How was work? Busy. Anything interesting happen? Not really. Conversations that once lasted an hour now ended in seconds. Nathan noticed. He simply wasn't ready to interpret what it meant. One Thursday evening, Evelyn arrived home almost 2 hours later than expected. She entered carrying takeout containers and an exhausted expression. Nathan looked up from the kitchen island. Long meeting? Terrible meeting. She removed her coat. New campaign issues. Nathan nodded. The explanation sounded reasonable. Marketing crises happened all the time. Yet, as Evelyn disappeared upstairs, he noticed her phone light up on the counter. A message appeared briefly before the screen locked. He wasn't trying to read it. His eyes simply landed there. The sender's name wasn't visible. Only 3 words. Wish you stayed. The message vanished before Nathan could process it. His stomach tightened. Then he immediately hated himself. There were countless innocent explanations. Friends, co-workers, a client dinner, anything. He forced himself to look away. Trust wasn't supposed to require evidence. At least that's what he had always believed. Upstairs, Evelyn stood inside the bathroom staring at her reflection. Her heart raced. Not from guilt. Not yet. Something more complicated. Excitement. The dangerous kind. The kind she hadn't felt in years. She unlocked her phone. Another message from Damien. Already miss your smile. A smile appeared on her face before she could stop it. Then she quickly erased it. Because even she understood how ridiculous this was becoming. Damien Ross wasn't her husband. He wasn't even officially part of her life. Yet somehow his attention had become the brightest part of her day. That realization should have frightened her. Instead, it thrilled her. The first time she met Damien after the gala had been entirely innocent. A lunch meeting, discussing sponsorship opportunities between their companies. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing secret. Just business. Then another meeting followed. Then another. Conversations became longer. More personal. More comfortable. Damien possessed a talent Evelyn had rarely encountered. He made people feel fascinating. Every observation she offered seemed brilliant. Every joke felt funny. Every complaint felt important. When she spoke, he listened. Or at least he appeared to. After years of marriage, she had forgotten what constant attention felt like. Now she couldn't stop thinking about it. Across the city, Damien sat inside a luxury condominium, overlooking the Chicago River. His phone rested beside a glass of bourbon. A slow smile crossed his face as he read their message history. He understood people exceptionally well, particularly ambitious people, particularly lonely people, and Evelyn Harper happened to be both. Damien wasn't in love, not even close, but he enjoyed influence. He enjoyed admiration. He enjoyed winning. And lately, Evelyn had become a challenge he increasingly wanted to conquer. Back at the Cole residence, Nathan lay awake beside his sleeping wife. Or at least he assumed she was sleeping. The darkness felt heavier than usual. Months earlier, they used to fall asleep talking. Now most nights ended in silence. Nathan stared at the ceiling, his thoughts drifting toward uncomfortable questions. Was he working too much? Had he become boring? Predictable? Emotionally unavailable? Every article about struggling marriages seemed to suggest the same thing. Distance didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, one neglected conversation at a time, one missed opportunity at a time, one forgotten date night at a time. The possibility that he had contributed to their growing disconnect filled him with guilt. And guilt had a way of blinding people, particularly good people. The following week brought another strange moment. It happened on a Saturday morning. Nathan sat at the dining table reviewing documents while Evelyn drank coffee across from him. For nearly 10 minutes, she smiled intermittently at something on her phone. A private smile, the kind people rarely realize they're wearing. Nathan noticed because he hadn't seen that expression directed toward him in a long time. "What are you smiling at?" he asked casually. The reaction came instantly. Evelyn locked the screen. Too quickly. Almost reflexively. "Oh. Nothing." Nathan looked at her. She looked away. For a brief second, discomfort passed between them. Then she stood. "I should get ready." And just like that, the moment disappeared. But Nathan couldn't forget it. Because for the first time, a thought entered his mind that he had spent months avoiding. What if this wasn't about work? The possibility frightened him, not because he believed it, because he didn't want to. That evening, Evelyn attended another industry event. Nathan remained home. Around 10:30, he received a text. "Running late. Don't wait up." The same words. Again. Something inside him shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough to create certainty, but enough to create doubt. And once doubt enters a marriage, it rarely leaves quietly. Meanwhile, across downtown Chicago, Evelyn sat beside Damien at an upscale rooftop lounge. Snowflakes drifted outside the glass walls overlooking the city skyline. The atmosphere felt intimate despite the crowded room. Damien leaned back in his chair. "You know what I like about you?" Evelyn laughed softly. "That sounds dangerous." "I'm serious." He studied her. "You've built an impressive life." She smiled politely. "So have you." "No." Damien shook his head. "You built yours while everyone underestimated you." The words struck deeper than he realized. Or perhaps exactly as deeply as he intended. Because Evelyn had spent years fighting for recognition. Years proving herself in boardrooms dominated by older executives. Years feeling like the supporting character in stories centered around powerful men. Nathan had always supported her. Always. But support wasn't the same as admiration. And admiration was intoxicating. For a moment, she imagined an entirely different life. A life filled with excitement, attention, passion, possibility. The fantasy felt beautiful. Because fantasies always do. What Evelyn couldn't see was that she wasn't falling in love with Damien. She was falling in love with how Damien made her feel about herself. And those are two very different things. Near midnight, Damien walked her toward the valet entrance. Cold winds swept between skyscrapers. Neither spoke immediately. The city lights reflected in Evelyn's eyes. "You should go home," Damien finally said. She nodded. Yet neither moved. The pause lingered. Dangerously. Then Damien stepped closer. Not enough to touch her. Just enough to change the air between them. Evelyn's pulse quickened. A choice existed in that moment. A small choice. The kind that rarely feels significant while it's happening. The kind that eventually changes everything. After several seconds, she looked away first. "I should leave." Damien smiled. "Good night, Evelyn." She entered her car. The door closed. The opportunity passed. For now. Yet, as she drove through the sleeping city, she realized something disturbing. Part of her wished she had stayed. Back at home, Nathan sat alone in the living room. The television played quietly without his attention. A framed photograph rested on the bookshelf nearby. Another memory. Another version of their marriage. Another reminder of what they used to be. At 12:47 in the morning, headlights appeared through the front windows. Nathan watched Evelyn pull into the driveway. Relief arrived first, then confusion. Because relief shouldn't have been necessary. Not in a healthy marriage. Not in a faithful one. As Evelyn entered the house, she found Nathan still awake. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face. "You should be asleep." Nathan forced a smile. "I wasn't tired." Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Between them sat a growing collection of unanswered questions. And somewhere beneath those questions, buried deep enough that Nathan still couldn't fully recognize it, the first genuine crack in his trust finally appeared. The worst part wasn't that he suspected something. The worst part was that he was beginning to fear he might be right. December arrived with the first heavy snowfall of the season. Chicago transformed overnight. The streets glowed beneath holiday lights. Storefront windows filled with decorations. Luxury hotels hosted winter galas and corporate celebrations. To most people, it was the season of family, traditions, and endings. For Nathan Cole, it became the season of noticing things he wished he could ignore. The rumors started quietly. Not the kind of rumors that arrived through anonymous messages or scandalous headlines. The kind that traveled through expensive restaurants, executive lounges, and cocktail conversations among people who believed nobody important was listening. Nathan first heard Damian Ross's name during a private investor dinner at the Langham. The conversation had nothing to do with his marriage, at least initially. A venture capitalist sitting across from him laughed while discussing Chicago's rising business stars. "Ross seems to be everywhere lately." Several executives nodded. "Especially at marketing events. Charity galas, too. Always surrounded by beautiful women." The table chuckled. Nathan smiled politely and continued eating. Then someone added another comment. "Amazing how quickly he's become close with Evelyn Harper." The fork stopped halfway to Nathan's mouth. Only for a second. Nobody noticed. The conversation immediately moved elsewhere. But Nathan couldn't. The words lingered. "Close with Evelyn Harper." The statement itself wasn't alarming. Both of them worked within overlapping professional circles. Naturally, people would see them together. That was normal. Perfectly normal. Yet, for the rest of the evening, Nathan found himself replaying the remark. Not because of what had been said. Because of how casually it had been said. As if their connection was already obvious to everyone else. Everyone except him. That thought followed him home. A few days later, another small moment appeared. Then another. Then another. Each one insignificant alone. Together they formed something harder to dismiss. One Friday afternoon, Nathan attended a technology conference downtown. During a networking reception, he stood speaking with several executives when he noticed a familiar laugh. Evelyn's laugh. Not nearby. Across the ballroom. He turned instinctively. There she was, standing beside Damian Ross. Nothing inappropriate. No touching. No flirting visible from that distance. Just conversation. Yet something felt different. The space between them appeared unusually comfortable. The kind of comfort people develop after spending substantial time together. Nathan watched for less than 10 seconds before looking away. He immediately felt guilty. Spying wasn't who he was. Suspicion wasn't who he was. Still, the image stayed with him. Hours later, while driving home through evening traffic, he found himself asking the same question again. How much time were they actually spending together? At home, the holiday season usually brought warmth into the house. Decorations, music, shared traditions. This year felt strangely mechanical. Evelyn participated in everything. She decorated the tree, attended social events, hosted dinner parties. Yet emotionally, she seemed somewhere else. Present physically, absent everywhere else. One night Nathan noticed something peculiar. It happened while they decorated the Christmas tree. A glass ornament slipped from Evelyn's hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound startled both of them. Years earlier, they would have laughed, made a joke, cleaned it together. Instead, Evelyn appeared irritated. Not by the broken ornament, by the interruption. Her phone had vibrated moments before. Nathan noticed her glance toward the kitchen counter, then toward the shattered glass, then back toward the phone, almost instinctively, as if the message mattered more. The realization stung, not because of the phone itself, because of the priority. Nathan quietly grabbed the broom. "I'll get it." Evelyn nodded, already reaching for her phone. A few moments later, she disappeared into another room. Nathan remained kneeling on the floor, sweeping tiny pieces of broken glass, and wondering why something so small suddenly hurt. A week before Christmas, another clue emerged. Entirely by accident. Nathan wasn't searching for evidence. In truth, he still desperately wanted innocent explanations. That afternoon, he stopped by Evelyn's office to surprise her with lunch, a gesture he hadn't made in years, partly because work had consumed him, partly because he hoped reconnecting might help repair whatever was happening between them. The receptionist smiled politely. Evelyn stepped out. Nathan checked his watch. Meeting? I believe so. The answer seemed routine, until another employee passed by and casually spoke, probably with Damien. The comment was innocent, thoughtless, forgotten immediately by the person who said it. Nathan smiled, thanked everyone, then left carrying 2 untouched lunches. The cold air outside felt sharper than usual. For the first time, he didn't focus on whether Evelyn was lying. Instead, he focused on something else. How often had Damien's name appeared recently? Too often. Far too often. That evening he sat alone in his office. Snow fell beyond the windows. The city lights blurred against the dark sky. Nathan opened his laptop, not to investigate, not yet, simply to review upcoming social events, industry gatherings, corporate fundraisers, networking functions. Damien's name appeared repeatedly. So did Evelyn's. The overlap was undeniable. Again, none of it proved anything, but the pattern existed. And patterns mattered. Nathan built his career identifying patterns, recognizing hidden threats before they became visible, connecting unrelated details. Now those same instincts were beginning to whisper uncomfortable truths. Upstairs, Evelyn sat in bed messaging Damien. Their conversations had evolved far beyond business. Nothing explicitly romantic, nothing she couldn't technically defend. Yet she knew. Deep down, she knew. The emotional intimacy had already crossed boundaries. Damien knew how her mornings started, what frustrated her, what she dreamed about, what she feared. He knew things Nathan no longer seemed to know. Or perhaps things she had stopped sharing with Nathan. That distinction mattered. But Evelyn avoided thinking about it, because whenever guilt surfaced, Damien offered another compliment, another conversation, another reminder that she still felt desired, alive, seen. And every time, guilt retreated a little further. Meanwhile, Nathan sat downstairs studying a photograph on his phone. It had been taken almost 3 years earlier. A candid picture of him and Evelyn at a lake house in Wisconsin. Neither looked toward the camera. They were laughing at something forgotten long ago. The image felt strangely foreign now, as if it belonged to different people, a different marriage. His chest tightened, not with anger, with grief. Because grief often arrives long before loss becomes official. Near midnight, Nathan closed the phone and leaned back in his chair. For months he had blamed himself. Perhaps he still did. Partially. No marriage failed because of one person alone. But another possibility was becoming impossible to ignore. Maybe the distance wasn't accidental. Maybe someone else had stepped into the space between them. The thought made him physically uncomfortable. Not because he lacked evidence. Because deep down, he already knew where the evidence was leading. Outside, snow continued falling across the city. Inside the quiet house, 2 people prepared for sleep beneath the same roof. Only one of them still believed they were fighting for the same marriage. And for the first time since Evelyn had walked out wearing that black dress and told him not to wait up, Nathan allowed himself to consider the possibility he had spent months avoiding. His wife might not simply be drifting away. She might already belong emotionally to someone else. The moment the thought fully formed, the last of his certainty disappeared, and in its place came something far more dangerous. The need to know the truth. January arrived beneath a blanket of ice and steel-gray skies. The holiday season ended. The decorations disappeared. The parties stopped. The city returned to work. And so did Nathan. From the outside, nothing appeared different. He still attended board meetings. Still shook hands with investors. Still came home each evening and asked Evelyn how her day had been. Still played the role of a devoted husband with remarkable precision. In many ways, he became better at it than ever before. Because now every conversation carried purpose. Every observation mattered. Every detail was remembered. The strange thing about suspicion was that it changed how a person experienced reality. For months Nathan had been searching for reasons not to worry. Now he was simply paying attention. And once he started paying attention, the world looked very different. Evelyn noticed none of it. She interpreted his calmness as trust, perhaps even complacency. That misunderstanding would eventually become her greatest mistake. One snowy Tuesday afternoon, Nathan attended a private leadership luncheon hosted by several prominent Chicago executives. The gathering focused on cybersecurity concerns among major corporations. A familiar topic, a familiar room. Halfway through the event, a discussion emerged regarding confidential market strategies and pending acquisitions. Several executives expressed concerns about information leaks appearing throughout various industries. Nothing unusual. Corporate espionage existed everywhere. Still, one comment caught Nathan's attention. A pharmaceutical CEO sitting across the table sighed. "It's getting harder to keep negotiations private." Another executive nodded. "Someone always talks. Or someone benefits." The room laughed. Then another man added casually, "Damian Ross always seems to know things before everyone else." More laughter followed. The statement appeared harmless. Yet Nathan noticed something others ignored. Nobody seemed surprised, as though Damian's reputation for obtaining privileged information was already established. The observation lingered in Nathan's mind long after lunch ended. That evening, he returned home carrying an uncomfortable question. Not about Evelyn. About Damian. Who exactly was he? Nathan knew the public version. Successful entrepreneur. Investor. Charismatic rising figure in Chicago's business community. But public versions rarely told the entire story. Nathan spent part of the evening reviewing publicly available information. Nothing illegal surfaced. Nothing dramatic. Yet a pattern emerged. Damian always seemed unusually close to major business developments before they became public. Not enough to raise official concerns. Enough to create curiosity. Nathan closed the laptop. For the first time, his instincts told him the problem might be larger than an affair. Much larger. Upstairs, Evelyn prepared for another networking event. She stood before the mirror adjusting a silver necklace. Nathan watched from the bedroom doorway. Once upon a time, moments like this felt intimate. Now they felt observational, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold. "You look nice," he said. Evelyn smiled. "Thank you." The exchange was polite, friendly, and completely devoid of warmth. Nathan hated that realization, not because he missed passion, because he missed comfort. The easy familiarity that once existed between them, the feeling of being chosen. When Evelyn left, Nathan remained standing in the bedroom. His eyes drifted toward her nightstand. For several seconds, he stared at her phone charger. Empty. The phone was with her, of course. Always with her. A thought crossed his mind. A simple one. He could check. Find answers. Search for evidence. Instead, he turned away. If the truth existed, he wanted certainty. Not fragments. Not assumptions. Not stolen glimpses. Certainty. 3 days later, certainty moved one step closer. The discovery arrived through an entirely ordinary event. Nathan's company had recently entered discussions regarding a potential partnership with a healthcare technology firm. The negotiations were confidential, extremely confidential. Only a small number of people knew details. Nathan discussed the matter with almost nobody outside his executive team, certainly not with Evelyn, at least not intentionally. Then something strange happened. During a fundraising dinner, Nathan found himself speaking with another investor. The conversation shifted unexpectedly. The investor smiled. "I hear you're moving toward healthcare expansion." Nathan froze internally. His expression never changed. "We evaluate a lot of opportunities." The investor chuckled. "Ross thinks it's a smart move." For a moment, Nathan heard nothing else. The room continued moving around him. Wine glasses clinked. Conversations flowed. Music played. Yet his attention locked onto a single name. Ross. Damian Ross. Nathan carefully finished the conversation, then drove home in complete silence. The roads shimmered beneath fresh snowfall. Streetlights blurred against the windshield. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Because this wasn't about jealousy anymore. This wasn't about late-night texts, or emotional distance, or unanswered questions. This involved confidential information. Information Damian should not possess. And somehow he did. Nathan spent most of that night awake. Not investigating, thinking, reviewing, reconstructing months of memories, conversations, events, business gatherings, social functions, patterns. The pieces began connecting. Not completely, but enough. Enough to reveal the outline of something dangerous. The next week brought another revelation, one that hurt far more than the business concerns. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. Nathan had entered the kitchen earlier than usual. Evelyn sat alone at the counter drinking coffee, smiling at her phone. Again. The same smile. The one he never received anymore. She didn't notice him immediately. And because she didn't notice him, he witnessed something genuine, something unguarded, something real. The expression on her face wasn't flirtation. It wasn't lust. It wasn't excitement. It was affection. Deep affection. The kind that develops over time. The kind that belongs inside a marriage. Nathan stopped walking. A painful realization settled over him. Months earlier, he feared a physical affair. Now he feared something worse. An emotional one. Because physical betrayal could happen in a moment. Emotional betrayal required investment, choice, time, thousands of small decisions. And judging by the look on Evelyn's face, those decisions had already been made. When she finally noticed him, her smile vanished instantly. The transformation was subtle, yet impossible to miss. Nathan's heart sank. Not because she looked guilty, because she looked disappointed, as though he had interrupted something important. She locked her screen. Morning. Nathan nodded. Morning. Nothing else was said. Nothing needed to be. The silence carried its own meaning. Days later, another piece fell into place. Nathan attended a private meeting with one of his legal advisors. The conversation focused on corporate security. During a discussion about sensitive partnerships, the attorney offered an observation. Sometimes leaks come from places nobody expects. Nathan listened carefully. The attorney continued. Family members. Friends. Social relationships. People don't realize how much information they reveal in casual conversation. The words struck harder than intended. Because suddenly Nathan remembered dozens of evenings. Dinner conversations. Offhand comments. Harmless observations about business trends. Nothing confidential by itself. Yet viewed collectively? Perhaps enough. Enough for someone clever. Enough for someone ambitious. Enough for someone like Damian Ross. Nathan left the meeting feeling physically ill. Not because he had proof. Because he finally understood the possibility. If Evelyn had been sharing information, even unintentionally, the damage extended far beyond their marriage. Far beyond broken trust. And that possibility wounded him in a way infidelity alone never could. Because he had trusted her completely. Not only as a wife. As a partner. As someone standing beside him while he built his life's work. That trust now felt fragile. Maybe even misplaced. One evening near the end of January, Nathan sat alone in his office overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass. His reflection stared back at him. Tired. Older, somehow. Changed. For months, he had searched for explanations that protected Evelyn. Then he searched for explanations that protected their marriage. Now both possibilities were disappearing. The evidence remained incomplete. But the direction was unmistakable. Damian Ross was not simply a distraction. He was connected to something larger. Something calculated. Something dangerous. And Evelyn, whether knowingly or not, had become part of it. Nathan leaned back in his chair. For the first time since this nightmare began, grief slowly gave way to something else. Clarity. Cold. Uncomfortable. Necessary clarity. Because eventually every wounded person reaches a moment when they stop asking whether the truth will hurt, and start asking how much damage the lies have already caused. Nathan had reached that moment. What he didn't yet realize was that the most devastating discovery still lay ahead. And when it arrived, it would permanently change the balance of power between all three of them. February arrived with bitter winds that swept through downtown Chicago and turned every walk between buildings into a battle against the cold. Inside the Cole residence, however, the temperature between Nathan and Evelyn had settled into something even colder. Not arguments. Not confrontation. Distance. The dangerous kind. The kind that no longer required effort. Months earlier, Nathan had still searched for ways to reconnect. He had suggested weekend trips, dinners, and evenings away from work. Now he stopped asking, and Evelyn barely noticed. That was perhaps the clearest sign of all. A person fighting for a marriage notices when the other person stops reaching. A person already halfway out the door usually does not. To Evelyn, Nathan's growing silence felt like surrender. She interpreted his calmness as weakness, his restraint as ignorance, his patience as blindness. The possibility that he might understand far more than she realized never entered her mind. That confidence made her careless, and carelessness always leaves evidence behind. One Friday evening, Evelyn attended another private gathering hosted by investors and executives near the Chicago River. The event occupied the upper floor of a luxury hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the frozen city below. Damien arrived nearly 30 minutes late. As usual, people immediately gravitated toward him. He possessed that rare ability to make every room feel like his room. Every conversation seemed to bend naturally in his direction. Evelyn watched him from across the ballroom, and felt something she had not experienced in years. Anticipation. The sight of him still affected her. The attention, the confidence, the certainty. Everything about Damien felt exciting in ways that ordinary life no longer did. When he finally reached her side, his smile widened. "There you are," Evelyn laughed. "You say that every time, because every time I have to look for you." The comment was harmless, yet she felt warmth spread through her chest. Damien noticed. He always noticed. That was part of his talent. Not creating emotions, identifying the ones already waiting beneath the surface. Later that evening, they escaped the noise of the ballroom and found themselves standing near a quiet lounge overlooking the city skyline. Snow drifted outside the glass. The city lights shimmered below. For several minutes, they simply talked. Work, travel, dreams, future plans. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward more dangerous territory. Damien studied her carefully. "Are you happy?" The question arrived softly, almost casually. Yet Evelyn immediately knew what he was asking. She looked away. "That's complicated." "No." His voice remained calm. "It's actually very simple." Evelyn said nothing. Damien leaned against the window. People stay in unhappy situations because they're afraid of change. A familiar feeling stirred inside her. Validation. Permission. The suggestion that her dissatisfaction was not selfish but justified. Damien continued. "You only get one life." The words lingered. Simple words. Powerful words. Dangerous words. Because they appealed directly to the story Evelyn had begun telling herself. The story in which she was trapped. The story in which she deserved more. The story in which leaving Nathan represented courage rather than betrayal. She didn't notice how carefully Damien avoided discussing consequences. She didn't notice how every conversation focused on what she wanted, never what she might lose. That omission was intentional. Damien understood something Evelyn did not. Fantasy survives by ignoring cost. Meanwhile, across the city, Nathan sat inside a conference room reviewing financial reports. His attention wasn't on the documents. It was on a much larger plan. Weeks earlier, he had reached a painful conclusion. The marriage he thought he had was already gone. The only remaining question was how much damage Evelyn and Damien could still cause. Nathan refused to react emotionally. Instead, he approached the situation the same way he approached every major threat in business. Patiently, methodically, quietly. He began consulting attorneys. Not divorce attorneys at first. Corporate attorneys. Compliance specialists. Private investigators. Professionals trained to separate facts from assumptions. Nathan asked questions. Requested timelines. Verified details. He never exaggerated. Never speculated. Never shared conclusions he couldn't prove. That discipline produced results. The picture emerging around Damien Ross became increasingly troubling. Several business relationships appeared unusual. Several investments appeared suspiciously well-timed. Several opportunities seemed connected to information Damien should never have possessed. Still, the evidence remained incomplete. Nathan waited. Because timing mattered. Back at home, Evelyn's confidence continued growing. One evening she returned from dinner with Damien feeling almost euphoric. The relationship had still not become openly physical, yet emotionally, the boundaries had long since vanished. She now shared thoughts with Damien before sharing them with her husband. Shared frustrations, dreams, fears, victories. The intimacy felt natural, even inevitable. Nathan happened to be reading in the living room when she entered. For a moment she studied him. The sight surprised her. Nathan looked different lately. Calmer. More focused. Almost detached. Months ago she would have interpreted that as sadness. Now she saw something else. Acceptance. And strangely, that annoyed her. Part of Evelyn expected resistance, arguments, questions, desperation, some sign that Nathan feared losing her. Instead, he remained composed. The reaction unsettled her more than she admitted. "You're still awake," she said. Nathan closed the book. "I wasn't tired." The familiar phrase carried a subtle irony neither acknowledged. Evelyn removed her coat. "Busy week?" "A little." "Anything interesting happening?" Nathan looked at her. For the briefest moment, she felt as though he were studying her. Not speaking to her, studying her. Then the feeling disappeared. "A few things. Nothing more." The conversation ended. Yet, as Evelyn walked upstairs, she couldn't shake a strange sensation. For the first time in months, she felt uncertain. Not about Damien. About Nathan. The uncertainty faded quickly. She told herself she was imagining things. Nathan wasn't suspicious. Nathan wasn't strategic. Nathan wasn't preparing anything. He was simply adjusting to reality. At least that was what she believed. Gasta. Several days later, Damien invited her to a private dinner. The restaurant overlooked the Chicago River, its windows glowing against the winter darkness. The atmosphere felt intimate, exclusive, carefully selected. Halfway through the meal, Damien asked the question he had been building toward for weeks. "What do you see happening next?" Evelyn understood immediately. Her pulse quickened. She stared into her wine glass. "I don't know." "You do?" "No." She exhaled slowly. "I really don't." Damien watched her, then offered the future she secretly wanted to imagine. "A year from now." His voice remained calm. "No obligations. No expectations. No living according to someone else's schedule." Evelyn listened. "And then?" Damien smiled. "Then you finally get to choose yourself." The words landed exactly where he intended. Because Damien understood Evelyn better than she understood herself. She didn't crave another man. She craved reinvention. She wanted a new version of her life. A new version of herself. Damien simply positioned himself at the center of that fantasy. What Evelyn couldn't see was that Damien's interest had never been as emotional as hers. He enjoyed influence. He enjoyed admiration. And increasingly, he enjoyed access. Access to people. Access to information. Access to opportunities. Everything else was secondary, including Evelyn. Across town, Nathan sat inside his office reviewing a report delivered earlier that afternoon. His expression never changed. But the information confirmed several suspicions. Connections. Dates. Communications. Patterns. Not enough for public exposure. Not yet. But enough to reveal where the investigation was heading. Nathan set the report aside. Then opened another document. A draft, prepared by attorneys. The first stage of a plan Evelyn never imagined existed. For a long time, Nathan simply stared through the office windows. Snow fell beyond the glass. The city stretched endlessly into darkness. Months ago he would have fought desperately to save the marriage. Months ago he would have accepted blame simply to preserve what remained. That version of him was disappearing. Not because the pain had ended. Because the truth had changed him. The most dangerous phase of grief is not anger. It is acceptance. Acceptance creates clarity. Clarity creates action. And Nathan was no longer reacting. He was preparing. Upstairs, Evelyn fell asleep, believing she still controlled the narrative. She believed Nathan remained one step behind. She believed Damien represented her future. She believed she could decide when the marriage ended. What she didn't realize was that the balance of power had already shifted. Quietly. Completely. And somewhere within a growing collection of evidence, legal documents, and carefully assembled facts, the beginning of her downfall was already taking shape. She simply hadn't seen it yet. March arrived with unpredictable weather. One day Chicago sat beneath bright sunlight reflecting off melting snow. The next day, freezing rain coated streets in ice and turned morning commutes into chaos. The city seemed unable to decide whether winter was ending or fighting to survive. Nathan understood the feeling. For months he had existed between two realities. One part of him still mourned the marriage he thought he had. The other part was preparing for the consequences of the marriage that actually existed. Now, for the first time, those realities were beginning to merge. And the truth emerging from the shadows was far worse than he had imagined. The breakthrough arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Not through dramatic surveillance photographs. Not through secret recordings. Not through an accidental confession. It arrived through financial records. Cold. Boring. Precise. The kind of evidence people usually ignored. Nathan sat inside a conference room with 2 attorneys and a corporate investigator he had quietly retained several weeks earlier. A stack of documents rested on the polished table. The investigator slid another folder forward. "You should see this." Nathan opened it. Inside were timelines, investment records, communication logs, corporate transactions. At first glance, none of it seemed remarkable. Then the pattern emerged. The same pattern appearing over and over again. Damian Ross repeatedly positioned himself ahead of business developments before they became public. Not every time. Just enough times to create statistical impossibility. Nathan studied the pages carefully. The investigator continued. "We can't prove where all the information came from." Nathan nodded. "But," the investigator pointed towards several highlighted entries, "we can prove he benefited from it." Silence settled over the room. Nathan continued reading. The dates made his stomach tighten, because many of the opportunities aligned directly with periods during which Evelyn had spent substantial time with Damian. Business dinners, private meetings, networking events, travel conferences, months of overlap, months of access, months of conversations. The implications were impossible to ignore. Nathan leaned back slowly. His chest felt strangely hollow. Not because he was shocked, because the evidence transformed suspicion into reality. And reality always hurts differently. One attorney spoke carefully. "If Evelyn shared information, it may not have been intentional." Nathan remained silent. The attorney continued. "People reveal more than they realize." Nathan knew that. In fact, the possibility made everything worse. If Evelyn had consciously betrayed him, the situation would be simpler. Crueler, perhaps, but simpler. Instead, the evidence suggested something far more tragic. Damian had identified her vulnerabilities, exploited them, encouraged them, then used the relationship to place himself near valuable information. Nathan stared out the conference room window. Downtown Chicago stretched below. For months he had imagined Damian as a rival, a man pursuing another man's wife. Now a different picture emerged. Damian wasn't merely chasing Evelyn, he was using her. And suddenly, Nathan felt something unexpected. Pity. Not enough to erase her choices. Not enough to excuse her betrayal. But enough to understand that she wasn't the only person being manipulated. That realization changed everything. Later that evening, Nathan returned home. Evelyn sat in the living room reviewing campaign materials on her tablet. The scene appeared completely ordinary, comfortable even. For a moment Nathan simply watched her. She looked relaxed, happy, certain. The contrast nearly broke his heart, because she had no idea what was coming, no idea how fragile her world had become, no idea that the fantasy she had spent months building rested on lies. "Evelyn." She looked up. "Hey." Nathan smiled faintly. "Long day?" "A little." She set the tablet aside. "What about you?" Nathan considered the question. The truthful answer would have changed everything. Instead, he said, "Busy." She nodded. Neither said another word. The silence felt enormous. Not because of what was spoken, because of what wasn't. For the first time, Nathan realized he was looking at someone he no longer fully knew, and perhaps had not known for quite some time. Across the city, Damian Ross sat inside a private members' club overlooking the Chicago River. Several investors occupied nearby tables. Laughter drifted through the room. Expensive whiskey flowed freely. Damian appeared perfectly comfortable, perfectly confident. His recent successes had reinforced a belief he already possessed in abundance. That he was smarter than everyone else. That belief had carried him through most of his adult life. It had also blinded him to one critical mistake. He viewed Nathan solely as a husband. A distracted husband. An emotional husband. A wounded husband. He never viewed Nathan as a CEO who had spent 2 decades identifying hidden threats and dismantling them systematically. That miscalculation would soon become catastrophic. The following week brought another revelation. The investigator delivered additional information regarding Damian's relationships with several other executives and business leaders. The pattern repeated itself. Different names, different industries, same method. Build trust, gain access, collect information, position investments, profit quietly. Most victims never realized what happened, because technically, nothing illegal appeared obvious. Everything existed inside gray areas. Suggestions, conversations, insights, coincidences, the kind of behavior difficult to prosecute, but devastating once exposed publicly. Nathan reviewed every document personally, every timeline, every communication record, every financial connection. He became meticulous, patient, ruthless in a way few people had ever seen. Not because he wanted revenge, because he wanted certainty. Months earlier he might have confronted Evelyn immediately, demanded explanations, started arguments. Now he understood something important. Truth has greater power when it arrives all at once, and Nathan intended to make certain nobody escaped it. One evening, near the end of March, Evelyn attended a private dinner with Damien. The restaurant overlooked Lake Michigan. Spring storms rolled across the dark water outside. Inside, candlelight reflected across polished glass. The atmosphere felt intimate, almost romantic. Evelyn listened while Damien described future plans, investment opportunities, travel, expansion projects, possibilities, always possibilities. The future he painted felt effortless, exciting, limitless. For months she had allowed herself to imagine becoming part of that future. Not immediately, eventually, once everything else sorted itself out, once difficult conversations happened, once decisions were made. She never stopped to ask a crucial question. What exactly was Damien sacrificing? The answer, of course, was almost nothing, because unlike Evelyn, he had never truly placed his life at risk. As the evening continued, Damien reached across the table and lightly touched her hand. A simple gesture. Yet Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. The emotional boundary she once promised herself she would never cross had long since disappeared, and still she convinced herself she remained in control. Meanwhile, Nathan sat inside his office reviewing the final pieces of a growing strategy. The evidence now filled multiple secure files. Legal reviews were underway. Corporate compliance teams were quietly preparing reports. Several influential individuals would soon receive information they had been missing for years. Nathan wasn't building a case anymore. He was positioning one. Every piece needed to land at precisely the right moment. Too early and people could hide. Too late and opportunities would disappear. Timing mattered. It always mattered. Near midnight, he walked toward the window. Rain streaked the glass. The city lights shimmered below. His reflection stared back at him. Months ago he barely recognized the man looking back. Now he did. The pain remained. The grief remained. But confusion was gone. And confusion had been the heaviest burden of all. For the first time since Evelyn uttered the words "Don't wait up," Nathan knew exactly what had happened. He knew who Damien was. He knew how the manipulation worked. He knew how deeply Evelyn had been drawn into it. Most importantly, he knew something neither of them understood. The game was already over. They simply hadn't seen the final move yet. Upstairs, Evelyn slept peacefully beside a future she still believed she controlled. She imagined difficult choices ahead, emotional conversations, perhaps even freedom. What she could not see was that the foundation beneath every one of those dreams had already begun to crack. The collapse had started, quietly, invisible from above, but inevitable. And when it finally arrived, it would not destroy only a marriage. It would destroy every illusion Damien Ross had spent years constructing, and every illusion Evelyn had sacrificed her marriage to believe. April arrived with warmer air, blooming trees, and the illusion of renewal. For Evelyn Harper, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. For Nathan Cole, it was the final act. The invitation arrived weeks earlier. The Chicago Leadership Foundation's annual spring gala, one of the most prestigious events in the city. CEOs, investors, politicians, philanthropists, media figures. The kind of gathering where careers could be elevated or destroyed in a single evening. Nathan had attended for years. So had Evelyn. This year would be different, not because of the event itself, because Nathan had chosen it carefully. Every piece of evidence, every report, every timeline, every conversation, everything had been positioned in advance. Now all he had to do was let the truth arrive. The evening began beautifully. The ballroom occupied the top floor of a luxury hotel overlooking downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble. Waiters moved gracefully through crowds carrying champagne and expensive wine. Laughter echoed through the room. Power mingled with prestige. Influence mingled with ambition. And in the center of it all stood Evelyn Harper. Radiant, confident, certain. Her emerald gown attracted attention everywhere she went. Compliments followed her throughout the evening. Photographers requested pictures. Executives greeted her warmly. Several colleagues congratulated her on a recent marketing award. Everything appeared perfect, exactly as she wanted. Across the room, Damian Ross enjoyed similar attention. He moved through conversations effortlessly, shaking hands, sharing stories, collecting admiration. The future seemed bright. Neither of them noticed Nathan watching. Not because he was hiding, because he no longer needed to. Months ago he would have stared at Damian with jealousy. Months ago he would have looked at Evelyn with heartbreak. Tonight he felt neither, only clarity. The first crack appeared shortly after 8 o'clock. A group of investors quietly received confidential packets delivered by legal representatives. Nothing dramatic. No announcement. No scene. Just documents. Several recipients opened them immediately. Others waited. Within minutes, expressions began changing. Curiosity, confusion, concern. Nathan remained calm. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Across the ballroom, Damian noticed one investor abruptly ending a conversation, then another. A third soon followed. His smile remained intact, but uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. The change was subtle. Only someone looking for it would have noticed. Nathan noticed. Half an hour later, the second phase began. Several executives received additional compliance reports regarding questionable investment timing linked to Damian's business network. Again, there was no public spectacle, no accusation, only facts, dates, transactions, patterns, connections. The kind of information powerful people took very seriously. The atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted. Conversations grew quieter, more focused. Several individuals began speaking privately. Phones appeared. Messages spread. Questions emerged. Damian felt it immediately. He simply didn't know why. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued enjoying the evening, completely unaware. When she eventually found Damian near the bar, she sensed tension. Everything okay? Damian forced a smile. Just business. She frowned. You seem distracted. I'll handle it. The answer sounded confident, yet something in his voice felt unfamiliar. For the first time since she met him, Damian appeared uncertain. The feeling unsettled her. Across the room, Nathan checked his watch. The final phase was approaching. Months of preparation had led here, not to humiliate, not to create chaos, to reveal truth. There was a difference, a significant one. At 9 o'clock, the Foundation's chairman stepped onto the stage. The crowd gathered. Applause filled the ballroom. A brief speech followed. Recognition awards, charitable achievements, annual acknowledgments. Everything appeared normal. Then came the announcement Nathan had arranged weeks earlier. A special recognition segment highlighting ethical leadership and corporate integrity. Several respected business leaders were invited to participate, Nathan among them. Evelyn smiled when she heard his name. Pride surfaced instinctively. Despite everything happening between them, part of her still admired him. That made what followed even worse. Nathan stepped onto the stage, calm, composed, measured. The room quieted. He thanked the Foundation, thanked the organizers, thanked the audience. Then he began discussing trust. The word echoed through the ballroom. Trust between leaders, trust between partners, trust between organizations, trust between people. Evelyn listened. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Nathan said something that made her stomach tighten. Most betrayals don't begin with malicious intent. The room remained silent. Nathan continued. They begin with small compromises. Something cold moved through her chest. A strange instinct. A warning. For the first time all evening, she felt afraid. Nathan's voice remained steady. People rarely destroy their lives in a single decision. The audience listened carefully. They destroy them through thousands of small decisions they convince themselves don't matter. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. Damian's expression hardened. Neither understood how much had already happened behind the scenes. Nathan paused, then looked directly into the audience. Not at Evelyn. Not at Damian. Beyond them. Toward everyone. The most dangerous manipulation isn't convincing someone to betray others. His voice remained calm. It's convincing them they're acting in their own best interest while being used. Silence consumed the ballroom. Now people were paying attention. Really paying attention. Several executives exchanged looks. Several investors already understood where this was heading, because they had read the reports, because they knew the facts. Nathan continued, carefully, precisely, every word deliberate, without accusations, without theatrics, without emotion. The evidence spoke for itself. He referenced confidential investigations, patterns of financial exploitation, strategic manipulation of professional relationships, repeated access to sensitive information through cultivated personal connections. Nothing defamatory, nothing unproven, everything documented, everything verified. As realization spread through the room, heads slowly turned toward Damien Ross. The shift happened almost physically, like a current moving through water. Damien immediately understood. Not everything. Enough. His face lost color. For the first time all evening, genuine panic appeared. The investors who had once surrounded him now stood elsewhere. The executives, who once welcomed him warmly, avoided eye contact. Conversation stopped when he approached. Years of carefully constructed influence began collapsing in real time. And then Evelyn finally understood. Not the entire truth. The first terrible piece of it. Nathan knew. He had known. For months. The realization hit with crushing force. Her hands trembled. She looked toward the stage. Toward her husband. The man she believed was unaware. The man she believed was defeated. The man she believed she controlled. Nathan never looked at her. Not once. And somehow that hurt more than public anger ever could. Because she suddenly realized something horrifying. This wasn't revenge born from rage. This was preparation born from acceptance. Months of acceptance. Months during which he quietly let her reveal who she truly was. Around the ballroom, consequences continued unfolding. Several business leaders openly distanced themselves from Damien. Potential deals evaporated. Relationships fractured. Opportunities disappeared. Years of reputation disintegrated within an hour. Yet the worst moment arrived when Evelyn turned toward Damien, expecting reassurance, an explanation, anything. Instead, she found him staring at his phone, answering messages, making calls, trying desperately to save himself, not her, himself. The truth became impossible to ignore. The future Damien promised had never truly included her, not in the way she imagined. She wasn't a partner. She was an asset, a connection, a source of access, a useful piece on a larger board. And now that board was collapsing. Damien barely looked at her. That single fact shattered what remained of her illusion. For months, she had risked everything believing she was choosing love. Standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by Chicago's most influential people, she finally understood she had sacrificed her marriage for a fantasy. And fantasies cannot save you when reality arrives. Across the room, Nathan stepped down from the stage. Applause filled the ballroom. Measured, professional, respectful. He accepted congratulations, shook hands, exchanged brief conversations, all while Evelyn stood frozen beneath the weight of her own choices. For the first time since this nightmare began, the balance of power was no longer shifting. It had shifted completely. And as the evening continued around her, Evelyn watched the life she thought she controlled begin to disintegrate one irreversible piece at a time. The collapse did not happen all at once. That was the cruelest part. Evelyn Harper had imagined disaster would arrive dramatically. A single moment, a single conversation, a single irreversible event. Instead, her life unraveled slowly, methodically, piece by piece, day after day. The morning after the gala, Chicago woke beneath clear skies and early spring sunlight. For most people, it was just another Thursday. For Evelyn, it was the beginning of an ending. She sat alone at the kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The house felt unfamiliar. Not physically, emotionally. Every room seemed filled with ghosts, memories, regrets, questions she could no longer avoid. Nathan had left early, as usual. The difference was that she now understood why. He wasn't escaping. He was moving forward, without her. The realization settled heavily in her chest. The previous night's events replayed endlessly in her mind. The ballroom, the silence, the expressions on people's faces, Nathan standing calmly on stage, the devastating precision of every word. Most painful of all was the fact that he had never raised his voice, never humiliated her publicly, never attacked her. He simply revealed the truth and allowed reality to do the rest. That was what made it impossible to fight. 3 days later, Damien stopped answering her calls. At first Evelyn assumed he was dealing with the fallout. The investigations, the investors, the legal concerns. All reasonable explanations. Then a week passed. The silence continued. Finally, she drove to his office. The receptionist informed her he was unavailable. She waited anyway. 2 hours. 3. Eventually, she saw him emerge from a private conference room. For a brief moment, relief washed through her. Until she saw his expression. Not relieved. Not affectionate. Annoyed. Damien approached slowly. We shouldn't be meeting. Evelyn stared at him. What? He glanced around the lobby. This isn't the right time. The words felt unreal. You're serious? Evelyn. No. Her voice trembled. You don't get to say my name like that. Several people nearby looked away awkwardly. Damien lowered his voice. The situation has changed. The sentence hit harder than any insult. The situation has changed. Not I care about you. Not we'll get through this. Not I'm sorry. Just business. Just strategy. Just survival. In that moment, Evelyn finally saw him clearly. Not the man she imagined. The man who actually existed. The difference was devastating. Everything she had interpreted as devotion suddenly looked transactional. Every compliment. Every conversation. Every promise. Every future he painted. All of it designed to keep her moving in a direction that benefited him. Nothing more. Tears filled her eyes. Damien noticed. And looked uncomfortable. Not guilty. Uncomfortable. The distinction destroyed whatever remained of her illusion. You used me. He immediately shook his head. It wasn't like that. But neither of them believed it. Evelyn turned and walked away. Damien never followed. Never called. Never tried to stop her. That silence answered every remaining question. Back at the Cole residence, another silence had taken root. A different one. A permanent one. Nathan no longer slept in their bedroom. Most of his belongings had already been moved. Attorneys handled communication, schedules, property discussions, asset division. Everything proceeded with cold professionalism. One evening Evelyn found him in the study reviewing documents. The same room where months earlier he had sat wondering whether he was somehow responsible for losing his wife. Now he looked completely different. Not angry. Not wounded. Finished. That frightened her more than rage ever could. She stood in the doorway. Nathan. He looked up, calmly. Yes? The simple response nearly broke her. Because there was no emotion behind it. No bitterness. No affection. Nothing. Just politeness. For several seconds she couldn't speak. Finally, she forced the words out. Can we talk? Nathan closed the folder. We can. Evelyn stepped inside. Her hands shook. The confidence she once carried had vanished months ago. What happened to us? Nathan looked at her quietly. The question seemed almost surreal. Not because it lacked meaning. Because she was asking it far too late. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he answered. You stopped being honest. The simplicity of the statement crushed her. No accusation. No lecture. Just truth. Tears filled her eyes. I made mistakes. Nathan nodded. Yes. The response landed like a verdict. Because there was no argument. No denial. No negotiation. Only reality. I never meant for this to happen. Nathan looked out the window. The city lights glowed beyond the glass. I believe you. Evelyn blinked. The answer surprised her. Nathan continued. I don't think you woke up one morning wanting to destroy your marriage. His voice remained steady. I think you made small choices. The same words he had spoken at the gala. The same words that now felt unavoidable. Then more small choices. Evelyn lowered her head. And eventually those choices became your life. Silence filled the room. Nathan stood. For the first time in months, he looked directly into her eyes. What she saw there terrified her. Not hatred. Absence. The love was gone. Completely gone. She finally understood the truth she had spent months avoiding. Nathan hadn't left her after the gala. He hadn't left her when the evidence emerged. He hadn't left her when Damien abandoned her. He had left much earlier. Emotionally. Quietly. While she was still busy believing she controlled the narrative. The divorce became official 6 weeks later. No public drama followed. No ugly court battles. No spectacular confrontations. Only signatures. Documents. Finality. The newspapers briefly covered the investigations surrounding Damian Ross. His business network fractured. Investors withdrew support. Professional opportunities vanished. Several inquiries remained ongoing. Though not all consequences were criminal, nearly all were financial and reputational. The man who once seemed unstoppable became someone people avoided discussing. His greatest asset had always been influence. Now influence was the one thing he no longer possessed. As for Evelyn, the damage proved equally severe. The marketing firm where she had built her reputation quietly terminated her position after internal reviews and mounting concerns about professional judgment. Industry opportunities disappeared. Former colleagues stopped returning calls. Invitations ceased arriving. The social circles she once navigated effortlessly became closed doors. Yet none of those losses hurt most. The worst pain waited elsewhere. Months later, on a cool autumn evening, Evelyn found herself sitting alone on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan, the same lake whose waves she could once see from the home she no longer owned. The city skyline glowed in the distance. Life continued moving. Without her, she watched couples walking nearby, friends laughing, families taking photographs. Ordinary moments, ordinary happiness, things she once possessed, things she had traded away. The wind carried the scent of approaching winter, and with it came a memory. A simple memory. One she had replayed countless times. Nathan standing in the hallway, looking at her before the charity gala, asking when she would be home. A concerned husband. A loyal husband. A man still trying to reach her. And then her own voice. Careless. Dismissive. Confident. Don't wait up. At the time, the sentence felt insignificant. Now she understood it differently. That wasn't the night she lost Nathan. That wasn't the night her marriage ended. It was the night she started walking away from everything that mattered. One decision, then another, until there was nothing left to save. Across the city, Nathan walked through a different life. A quieter one. A smaller one. But an honest one. The pain had not disappeared. Some wounds never fully do. Yet for the first time in a long time, he felt free. Not because he had won. Because he no longer needed to fight. The betrayal had taken many things from him. Trust, certainty, years he could never recover. But it had failed to take something more important, his self-respect, his clarity, his future. As he continued forward, he carried one final lesson with him. The most powerful revenge is not destruction. It is becoming someone who no longer needs the people who betrayed you. And somewhere behind him, in the ruins of choices she could never undo, Evelyn Harper finally understood that truth. Unfortunately for her, understanding it changed nothing. The story was over. The consequences were not.